Ladies and gentlemen, up next, the Lighthizer Doctrine. Please welcome former United States Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer and co-host of CPAC NOW Mercedes Schlapp.
Are there these after parties that we're missing? I mean, come on, this is so great. Are y'all having fun yet? Yeah. Okay, did you enjoy Nikki Haley and Mike Pompeo? I know, great patriots in the movement, and I have another great patriot with me, a former White House colleague, I would say, as our former U.S. Trade Representative, very important job, Ambassador Lighthizer. Thank you so much for being with us at CPAC.
It's my pleasure to be here.
So trade, you would think trade is one of these like very complicated issue dealing with negotiations, and talking about the doctrine, the Lighthizer Doctrine. I really like the title. How would you explain the Lighthizer Doctrine in terms of what works in trade policy?
So first of all, let me say it's a pleasure to be here. And what we did in trade in the Trump administration was, in my judgment, one of his most important accomplishments. And if it wasn't for CPAC and Matt and Mercedes and all of you backing us up, trust me, it wouldn't have happened. Because during that process, we not only fought with almost every country in the world, but we fought with free traders, big business, lobbyists, globalists, corporatists, and I could go on. And if we didn't have the backing of real Americans in the conservative movement, it would not have happened. So let me just start off with that. Now, in terms of, I'm not sure that President Trump would call it the Lighthizer Doctrine. He might refer to it by a different term.
He might call you and be like, what is this about the Lighthizer Doctrine? I thought it was a Trump doctrine.
So, yes, exactly. And if he said it was a Trump doctrine, I would not argue with him. So what did we believe? If you look at trade policy, at least since the 90s, has been a policy of free trade, globalism, corporate profits, maximizing consumption, price optimization. And what did we do? We wanted a policy that started off with, what kind of America do you want?
Right.
It's not important how much your third TV cost. It's important that we have strong communities, we have families staying together, we have kids respecting their parents because they work. So we started off with what I consider to be a very bedrock conservative philosophy. Worker first. America as producer, not America as consumer.
That's right, America worker first. Let me ask you with this question, because this is an interesting debate that the Republican Party has been having, right? We're normally the free market Republican Party, trade with everyone, but President Trump and your team changed that. What was the change that you made to, and when they would say the word, I remember when we would have these White House meetings in the Roosevelt room, they would bring up the word tariffs, and some of the Republicans and some of even our own colleagues would start sweating. They're like, what do you mean tariffs? We can't put tariffs on. So walk us through why the change, because we know President Trump did support tariffs, which in the Republican world is not necessarily considered something positive.
In the first place, let me say, in the Republican, in the conservative world, can I just take 1 minute on the kind of the history of this?
Yes.
So as conservatives, we like to think about values and tradition. All right, so what do we start with? We start with Alexander Hamilton in the Federalist Papers. He was in favor of tariffs, government subsidies appropriately done, and ultimately a national bank. We'll set that last issue aside. Then you had Henry Clay, who talked about something called the American system, and that is to build up manufacturing, make America a manufacturing powerhouse. Tariffs government subsidies, building the Erie Canal, ultimately the railroads and the like. That became the policy of the Republican Party by the time of Lincoln, and it remained the policy of the Republican Party at least till the Second World War. During that time, we became the greatest country in the world economically. We had, by 1890, we had the biggest economy in the world. I don't believe in applause lines. I just talk through them because I'm trying to get through so much stuff. So
you're like my history professor.
And then we had, now we've got World War II. Okay, that's fine. Eisenhower comes out. Eisenhower's worried about the Soviet Union, and that's a smart thing to worry about. Then you move forward from him. You have the president that I worked for first, Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan was an American first president. Ronald Reagan put limits on automobiles coming in from Japan, on semiconductors, on steel from everywhere in the world, on carbon steel. He promoted American agriculture, he promoted American manufacturing, but he demanded that these people respect our market. So that is basically, and I would say there is nothing conservative about free trade, and in fact, the opposite. Free trade is really about consumption. Consumption's about materialism. That is the opposite of values, which is what conservatives are for. So that was the fundamental change. Was it difficult? Yes. You have a lot of Republicans who had gotten into a habit of thinking, oh, we are for free trade. What that devolved into is we're for corporate profits, we're for cheap TV sets, and the cost. A liberal would say, well, the cost is fine. We'll just give those people money and take away the dignity of work. And what a conservative was saying is, well, we'll retrain them. But that also was sort of unrealistic, because you're not going to take a steel worker and have him code, right, or build semiconductors. We need an America that has basic values and that takes care of itself. And that is the difference. Ronald Reagan followed it, and Donald Trump started a worker-centered, community-centered, family-centered trade policy. And that was a revolution, and we did it. And then I would say the second thing he did, which was every bit as important, and in this area of trade and economics, is he raised the alarm on China. It's impossible for us to remember back 6, 7 years ago how people thought about China. Now everyone assumes that they're a problem, but people didn't assume that 6 years ago. And I fear that if the current administration gets another term, that they're going to go right back, get rid of the tariffs, get rid of the things that Donald Trump did to raise the alarm on China and to level the playing field with China.
You brought up the current administration. Okay, you all can say boo now. The Biden administration. One of the interesting things that we were talking about is Biden came out and said, we seek competition, not conflict with China. Your thoughts on that?
So, all right, now I want you to stay with me for a second. We have two issues. We have a security military issue and we have an economic issue, okay? We have the two issues. So basically you have four possibilities. You could have a military conflict or no military conflict, economic conflict or no economic conflict, right? Those are the only four options. Obviously, to have neither is basically just surrender, right? Letting the Chinese have their way. To have a military confrontation is something that we want to avoid. And the way to do that is to have the strongest economy in the world and stop transferring $350 billion a year, $6 trillion in the last 20 years to China to build up its military and the like. So to go back to my analysis, the two options are, one, the smart people say, let's prepare militarily, but not do anything economically. And what I'm suggesting is we should right now try to avoid the military and do everything we can to take them on economically. And that means strategically decoupling our economies. And President Trump, if you President Trump this week on Monday, and if you haven't watched this thing, watch it, all right? President Trump laid the cards down. He said, here's my position on trade. And in that, he called for tariffs to get back to balanced trade, but even more importantly, he called for tariffs and decoupling. He didn't use the term, but you read it, with China over a 4-year period. And it's absolutely essential that we do it. And when I have all these other candidates come out and say, China's a problem, China's a problem, China's a problem, my answer is, my response is, tell me where are you on decoupling? Because if you're not for decoupling, if you say we got to get tough with China, but yet you want to continue to transfer $300 billion a year and all of our technology to China, you want to continue to do that, but yet you want to be tough on China, it's madness. We're not going to beat China with the military alone. We're going to beat China economically. And right now, they are winning. Trust me, they're winning. And we're letting them win. And it's crazy. So these are the two things that, in my opinion, will cap off the first Trump term, the great accomplishments, change the way we think about trade towards workers, towards communities, towards families, and take on China. And unfortunately, all we did in 4 years was a good beginning. And at some point, we have to now finish it.
Let me ask you, President Biden, he's kept these tariffs on China. Is there concern that he's going to move away from them? What do you think? What do you think the plan is for the administration on dealing with China from a trade perspective?
So let's be honest. People tend to think of administrations as sort of monoliths. They're not a monolith. There are people in this administration that are good, smart people and see things more or less the way we do, all of us. There are people in that group. But I don't think the president's one of them. So there are people that are giving him advice, good advice. Do this, do this, do this. And for now, at least, he's kept the tariffs in place. My fear is that that's largely because of politics. That's my fear. I don't think he understands it. If you see everything he says, none of it seems to get the fundamental point. All right, this is the threshold. The threshold is they have the biggest army in the world and they're growing it. They have the biggest navy in the world and they're growing it. They're building nuclear facilities all across China. They've armed the South China Sea, all right? They're flooding the United States with fentanyl and responsible directly or indirectly for probably 70,000 deaths. They are spying on us. They're involved in espionage. They have this balloon that goes across. If you don't cross the threshold and say they are an adversary, then none of the things that I'm espousing make any sense.
Right.
And my fear is that he doesn't understand that, or that there's some other motivation that I don't know about. But if you sit there, I tell people 7, 8 years ago, a sensible person could decide they weren't a threat. Now, I said they were a threat, and I have for quite a while. But no sensible, honest person can say that now. You're either ignorant and don't know what you're doing, or you somehow are compromised.
Let me ask you, for Americans, should we be concerned about trade deficits?
So the answer is yes. And President Trump's second video that he let out this week is just on trade deficits. So, and for those of you who want to spend a pleasant 30 minutes, I did an article in The Economist a year ago, which you can get online, and you can get the first one for free. So I'm not subscribed. I'm not telling you to subscribe to The Economist. I wouldn't do that to you. But basically, trade deficits are an enormous problem. I'll spend 1 second describing it in a second, though. First of all, what's the trend? Last year, our goods deficit was $1.2 trillion. And our overall goods and services deficit was almost $1 trillion. Almost $1 trillion. Before COVID, under the Trump administration, we had 5 of 7 quarters in a row where the deficit came down. You're not going to have it drop off like this, but it was coming down like this. Now these people it's probably 60% bigger than it was when we left. It's literally, so what is the problem with the trade deficit? Other countries get this money, and what do they do with it? They ultimately have to buy assets in the United States.